think it was an actual serpent in the garden.
I do not believe that it was an actual serpent. I believe the Genesis 3 account was given so that anyone of any age or maturity could understand original sin. I believe that it is far more complex than that, because you begin to look at Ezekiel chapter 38, I believe. I may be wrong on the reference, but Ezekiel chapter 38, it talks about the trees in the garden, and the trees are always a type of people. They're a type of personalities. And so we're basically saying that God was basically using the tree as a metaphor of something that this entity carried that was not good to take in. And so now, listen, I'm all fine with the snake deal. I don't have any problem.
Right,
I don't want to make anybody mad about it at all. But when you look at the word nakash, it means shining one. And it talks about in any other beast of the field. That's kind of blind to us. It means living creature. It says in any living creature. So living creatures aren't just physical that we can touch, but there are unseen living creatures as well. So, we're talking about an entity that is interacting with our first parents and has intimate contact with.
Right.
Of course, Eden was the place in which God and man were to walk and operate in. So angelic beings had access to that area. So when Adam and Eve transgressed and sinned, that separated. That there was separation caused there. So I believe that they were warned, of course, in Genesis chapter 3. Sure. They were warned, guard and keep the garden. You don't use those terms if there is not an enemy. In fact, he tells them to subdue the earth. Well, obviously there was something that was antagonistic, in opposition. So I believe the fall of Lucifer was before the creation, the recreation of the earth, and that Adam was clearly warned. And then when this shows up, he begins to, entice and deceive Eve, because Eve was deceived. It was Adam that willfully partook of the fruit. Yeah. And it basically says that this enchantment came upon, and there was a seduction that began to happen. It's amazing. Now, I'm not going there, but it's amazing to me that the seductive treatment that is used in the text and also in the other texts that refer back to it, especially from the Apostle Paul, in regards to, I have espoused you as a virgin to Christ, and then he immediately talks about how that Eve was seduced. Right. So I'm not saying that there was sexual activity, but there was intimate activity that was contrary to what God wanted and desired for our parents. Yeah. And so, I just don't see it as simply as just a snake coming up there and beginning to tempt her to eat some kind of fruit that she was forbidden to eat.
Right. So, boy, there's a lot there.
It's complex, and it probably left it too open-ended. But
so let me ask you this then, since we're here. Do you think that, because you mentioned that you think the fall of Satan or Lucifer was prior to this, do you think, so some people would say, well, it's hard for me to think that God would just loose the devil, on Adam and Eve like that. And I've heard some people kind of posit that they believe, based on Ezekiel 28:13 through whatever, that Lucifer or Satan was there sort of as God's emissary prior to his fall. He was in the garden sort of as ambassador, and then somehow saw something in them that he coveted, and then carried out this deception on her, and essentially was given her authority through that act and Adam's act. So what do you say to that? And is there a tie-in to Ezekiel?
Well, if we look at the imagery that Ezekiel writes about, we see that Lucifer was clothed with the various stones.
Right.
He was clothed with, I believe, 7 of them, or 9 of them. There were 12 altogether in the high priest, in the Levitical priesthood. I believe that Lucifer was a priest. I believe that he was a part of the divine council.
Is that the Urim and the Thummim and
Yes.
so forth? That's very obscure stuff,
Yes,
isn't it?
yes. So I believe that he represented a priesthood. He was a guardian of the presence of God because he's a cherubim.
Right, right.
And so he's a different classification of an angelic being. So there's some interesting things. Hopefully I've got them written down here in Colossians. I have my own notes. But when you look at him, his name isn't really necessarily Lucifer. That's kind of, what the Latin Vulgate kind of used. So Latin is kind of
right.
But his name is Ben Hallel Sahar. So it's Hallel, and it means, if you break down the name, the word Hey, or the letter Hey, means to behold or to reveal,
right,
or to give a window to something. So here we get the Prometheus myth,
Yeah.
So basically, if you would talk to a modern-day Luciferian, which there are a lot of them, in our institutions today, Luciferians, they would tell you that Lucifer was the light bringer and that he is getting a bad rap because of the powers that be, in reference to our loving Father,
right,
is suppressing truth and suppressing human potential. The same lie that was told to Eve.
Sure.
So a Luciferian believes that he's Prometheus. He stole fire and he brought it down to humans, and now he's the bad guy.
And he's being punished for it.
And he's being punished for it. And so they make him very sympathetic. They make him a sympathetic character.
Sure.
And you begin to see this also in Hollywood. There's not one villain in a movie in the last 20 years that does not have a sympathetic story arc, including the Joker, which is an absolute horrible...
Sure.
Individual, but yet we get his backstory. He's been victimized.
Yeah.
He's operating from a realm of victimization. I've been there. That was done to me too.
Yeah.
And so basically we create this whole culture where it's okay.
It's okay to do those things
if you're victimized, right? And it's just like Better Call Saul, very popular show, but it shows this very narcissistic, selfish individual that doesn't care for anybody but himself. But because we see the pain of his past, we're to somehow accept that behavior is actually just a normal response.
Just okay, yeah.
And then you see Disney movies like Maleficent. Okay,
right.
You remember as kids when we saw that witch, when we saw that,
sure.
I mean, that was scary to us.
Right.
I mean, she was a villain.
Right.
But she's made sympathetic. She just had this. She faced rejection.
Tell the story from her point of view, which paints it in a different light.
And that's the old proverb we talked about the other day, the proverb that says, when the wolf tells a story, the shepherd is always the enemy.
Right.
So we have this upside down world where he's revealing, beholding, he's wanting to show us secrets. He's wanting to show us things that will maximize our human potential and take us to a higher level of consciousness or a higher level of living. And God, through his rules and regulations, is keeping us down. He's imposing his will upon, and Lucifer is here to open the door.
To liberate
us sexually.
Yeah.
The main thing is, if you look at the Kundalini, the Kundalini spirit that's in Hindu, and the chakra, it's amazing. It always starts with the genitals, It always, and then it goes up, and that's really the ruse is free yourself from
sexually,
the restraints
yeah.
sexually. because it opens the doorway to the mind. Think about that when it comes to one-night stands, things of that nature.
Sure.
I could have a relationship with a woman and it be totally on the up and up and fine. But the minute I get sexually involved with her, it changes the dynamic of it.
Yeah.
Now, I not only have her as an acquaintance, I've got her in my mind. You know, all of a sudden now I'm controlled by their emotions. I'm controlled what she thinks about me. I'm controlled, and that's the whole thing. So you know, I was telling you about Aleister Crowley and how that he was Kinsey, who brought in all this sex stuff, you know, in the 1950s.
Yeah.
He was a Crowleyite. And so this was meant as a psychological operation to bring, behold, reveal your sexuality is who you are. Right. This is who you are. This is the religion.
And we're seeing that continue and even, you know, propagated in furtherance, even in our culture today.
Sure.
You know, so now it's not just the liberty here, but it's, you know, whatever you want it to be. Is what
and then
it
went on into a doctor by the name of Money, who created what we know as the modern transgender movement. And so you've got, you know, Kinsey, and then you've got Money, and you've got these various players that are basically, just as the apostles and prophets wrote this book, they're writing things. They're writing papers that are infecting whole cultures, taught in universities, which are basically seminaries for secularism.
Sure.
And so you're getting, you know, they're writing their Bible.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah,
they're
that's
writing,
what it is.
You know.
So, you know, all that is predicated on this rigid authoritarian figure called God, when really, and like you said earlier, we could take this all the way back to the garden where Adam and Eve didn't, they already had everything. They were already given everything. They didn't have a sin consciousness. And that's what the tree of good and evil, or the understanding of good and evil, gave them. And of course, sin is the power there, or the law is the power of sin. So once they knew that, then they were destined to live sinfully. But God's already liberated us from the beginning, and now in Christ, it's the same. So the enemy's peddling the same lie, that there's something that you need that you don't have.
Right. You're being withheld.
When the freedom within Christ, and the freedom within godly relationships, and the freedom within godly sexual relationships is nothing. You know, the enemy can't compete with those things.
Well, it's the same thing. You know, Adam and Eve knew God as Yahweh, which is the very personal name of God. It is also the redemptive name of God. They knew him. If you look at the text in the 3rd chapter of Genesis, the enemy doesn't use Yahweh. He uses Elohim. And Elohim is impersonal.
Right.
And so when we say, I believe in God, well, up until about the last 5 years, no one had a problem with that.
Right.
Okay, or in God we trust. They wouldn't have a problem with that because it's impersonal. But when you start saying Jesus, then it takes it to a whole other place. And so he personalizes God, makes him look like this mechanical. You know, we were talking about the Star Wars franchise. Okay, I actually read a paper where the guy actually said, you know, the Empire wasn't really that bad. It was really the rebels that were doing all the killing. And that's certainly true. But that's the way the story arcs are in this fallen world. It's always upside down.
Sure. It's always from the opposite
And so
perspective.
God, which is representative of the Empire, is mechanical, is cold, is impersonal, you know, and then of course with Thanos in the Marvel universe. Okay, Thanos is coming to bring balance to creation, which Jesus is going to come and bring balance to the creation. You know, he is going to take care of business.
Right.
And they would rather fight for a fallen, crooked, nasty world than embrace what this entity was going to put. Now, I'm not saying Thanos is the hero here. What I'm saying is
it's not an exact application, but it's certainly similar.
But Thanos represents Yahweh in their mind. You have the Avengers, which are hybrid beings and demigods, along with humans, fighting for their existence. Does that sound like something? Sounds like Armageddon.
Yeah.
So you've got this upside down view, because in the eyes of the wolf, the shepherd is always the enemy. And so every story arc that we see is always in favor of rebellion. It's always in favor of breaking the rules, rebel without a cause, things of that nature.
Sure.
Those are embraced in our culture. Why? Because the whole world lies in the power of the wicked one, and the wicked one is at his core a rebel.
That's why it almost seems like no matter what party's in power, the pressure is always against that party, because they're the establishment at the moment, and everybody wants to push against them.